July 2025, the America's Got Talent stage was buzzing with anticipation, yet the audience didn't know they were about to witness something that would be remembered long after the lights faded. A quiet man with a cane walked out under the glare of the spotlights, his every step deliberate, his presence commanding in a way that felt both fragile and powerful. He stood in silence for 12 seconds, an eternity in television time, and in that silence, the entire theater shifted from polite curiosity to stunned focus. Viewers at home leaned forward, the judges exchanged puzzled glances, and the producers in the control room froze, wondering what exactly was happening. But what the cameras didn't reveal in that tense moment was the weight Chuck Adams carried with him onto that stage. Years of broken promises, industry betrayal, and battles that nearly silenced his voice forever. Before he ever sang a note, this man had lived a story of glory and heartbreak that most musicians only whisper about behind closed doors. He had once brushed shoulders with the biggest names in the business, stood on the brink of stardom, and then watched it all collapse into silence. And now, against all odds, he was back, staring down the biggest gamble of his life. America saw a man ready to sing, but they didn't see the unseen story that shaped those 12 seconds, the kind of story that turns a performance into a redemption. This was not just another audition. This was the untold saga of a voice the world almost lost. And what happened next would expose truths about music, fame, and resilience that America's Got Talent never aired. Long before Chuck Adams became a name whispered in talent show headlines, his story began in the quiet corners of Connecticut, where music wasn't a pastime but an inseparable part of his identity. From the age of 8, while most kids were focused on playground games, Chuck was already belting out Elvis Presley classics at church gatherings and backyard barbecues, turning those modest settings into his first stages. Family anecdotes describe a boy who didn't just sing notes, but lived inside them, channeling joy, longing, and heartbreak, with a maturity that startled those around him. These early years weren't about mimicry. They were about learning to translate emotion into sound, a gift that set him apart before he ever picked up an instrument. By adolescence, Chuck had discovered songwriting, a craft that allowed him not just to echo the voices of others, but to tell his own stories. In high school notebooks, he scribbled lyrics about love, loss, and identity, the kinds of themes that spoke to experiences far larger than a teenager's world. This quiet foundation built his artistic DNA, preparing him for a future where words and melodies would become his lifeline. Those who knew him back then recall a young man who seemed both destined and doomed. Destined for greatness because of his talent, doomed because his drive was so fierce it often outpaced the small town that surrounded him. When most of his peers were figuring out college majors or first jobs, Chuck was already crafting the blueprint of a career in music. And while the television audience in 2025 saw a 40-year-old with a weathered presence, the roots of that voice, that resilience, and that artistry were planted decades earlier in the simplest of places: backyards, basements, and the quiet spaces where a boy taught himself that music wasn't just something you do, it's something you are. After high school, Chuck Adams left the safety of Connecticut for the restless energy of New York City, a leap that would define his 20s and shape the man who would later stand on that America's Got Talent stage. In the city's dimly lit cafes and cramped open mic venues, Chuck began testing his voice against the noise of the metropolis, learning quickly that talent alone wasn't enough to cut through the chaos. He threw himself into the songwriter's circuit, co-writing with local artists, networking at every possible event, and slowly earning the reputation of someone who could translate raw human feeling into words and melody with uncanny precision. His dedication paid off when industry gatekeepers started noticing him, a moment that culminated in a development deal with Roc Nation, Jay-Z's powerhouse label. Suddenly, the kid from Connecticut was no longer just another hopeful. He was in the orbit of giants, penning hooks and melodies for artists like Ludacris while rubbing shoulders with the likes of Rihanna, J. Cole, and DJ Khaled. For many, this would have been the dream realized, but for Chuck, it was an awakening. He found himself behind the scenes, ghostwriting, sitting in marathon studio sessions, and learning the unglamorous truth that the music industry was as much about business strategy and timing as it was about heart and craft. He was writing for others, contributing to records that would dominate charts, but deep down he felt the uneasy tug of being sidelined from his own destiny. Still, these years were transformative. He learned discipline, resilience, and how fleeting opportunity could be. The streets of New York taught him survival. Roc Nation taught him professionalism. But inside, Chuck carried a question that would haunt him for years. Would the world ever hear his voice, not just the echoes he created for others? That tension between achievement and invisibility became the seed of both his downfall and his eventual comeback. The hidden chapter producers didn't show when he finally re-emerged under the spotlight. For Chuck Adams, the Roc Nation deal was supposed to be the golden ticket, the moment where years of late-night gigs and unpaid sessions would finally transform into the career he had dreamed of since boyhood. Yet what looked like a door opening soon revealed itself as a trapdoor beneath his feet. The reasons were never laid out in public with exact detail. Chuck himself has remained cautious, perhaps protective, when asked about what really went wrong. But insiders and fragments of interviews suggest a toxic mix of creative disagreements, shifting label priorities, and the brutal politics of an industry that chews through talent faster than it celebrates it. Some say his soulful, storytelling-driven style clashed with the commercial trends Roc Nation was chasing at the time. Others whisper that promises of artistic freedom were quietly rescinded, leaving him sidelined in favor of flashier names with more immediate mass appeal. Whatever the cause, the outcome was devastating. Meetings stopped happening, projects dried up, and the buzz around his name vanished almost overnight. For a young artist who had just tasted proximity to superstardom, the silence was deafening, a fall made even sharper because he had already glimpsed the view from the inside. Unlike some artists who pivot quickly into new contracts or reinvent themselves with industry backing, Chuck had no such safety net. The collapse of this deal wasn't just a career hiccup. It was a full derailment. He disappeared from the mainstream radar, left with nothing but memories of recording sessions with heavyweights and a hollow feeling of what might have been. America's Got Talent never told viewers that the man standing on their stage in 2025 had already lived through a heartbreak far worse than any no from a panel of judges. He had experienced the industry's cold shoulder, a rejection that left scars deeper than the public could see. And as he withdrew from the limelight, what followed was not a brief pause, but a decade-long exile from the very stage he had once believed was his destiny. What followed for Chuck Adams after the collapse of his Roc Nation deal was not a quick rebound or a seamless transition to another opportunity, but instead a decade-long stretch that could best be described as artistic exile. A period where he was neither fully gone from music nor fully present in it. For over 10 years, Chuck lived in a kind of purgatory that the industry rarely acknowledges, quietly working as an independent songwriter, producing tracks for other artists, and taking on side projects that paid the bills but never brought back the thrill of being center stage. The irony was painful. Here was a man with the talent to captivate arenas, yet most of his work during these years was heard only in demo form or credited to someone else. He wasn't chasing fame anymore, he was simply trying to survive, financially, emotionally, and artistically. Every day was a balancing act between keeping his skills sharp and keeping the lights on. He wrote songs in cramped apartments, recorded with borrowed equipment, and often questioned whether his moment had passed him by completely. Friends and colleagues recall how close he came to walking away, yet something inside him refused to quit, a stubborn belief that his voice still mattered even if the world wasn't listening. While many in his situation would have hung up the guitar, Chuck kept training in the shadows, sharpening his craft, refining his voice, and preparing without even realizing it for a second chance. These were years of invisibility, of watching younger artists rise to stardom while he scrolled through headlines in quiet apartments, wondering if his name would ever mean anything again. And yet, when America saw him walk onto that AGT stage in 2025, what they didn't know was that behind the calm expression and steady voice stood a man who had already fought through a decade of silence, heartbreak and obscurity, and who had chosen resilience over surrender. When the dust of disappointment finally settled, Chuck Adams made a decision that would redefine his journey. He would no longer wait for the industry to give him permission to sing his truth. He would build it himself. No more glossy boardrooms or executives promising the world. Instead, it was Chuck, his guitar, and whatever recording equipment he could afford. In 2024, he released A Place Called Heaven, a track that became both confession and declaration, written, composed, performed, and produced entirely on his own dime. It wasn't glamorous, there were no million-dollar budgets or slick marketing teams. But the song hit differently because it was authentic, born from scars and survival. Fans who discovered him through YouTube and Spotify didn't hear an artist chasing trends. They heard a man pouring real life into every chord. From small Nashville venues to late-night social media uploads, Chuck slowly built a grassroots following of people who weren't just fans of his music, but believers in his story. For the first time in years, he wasn't a ghostwriter hiding behind other people's voices. He was the voice. Independence gave him freedom, but it also demanded relentless discipline. And in that fire, he forged a sound that felt raw, honest, and impossible to ignore. This chapter, though rarely acknowledged by television producers, was the true beginning of his comeback, because it proved that Chuck Adams didn't need industry machinery to matter. He only needed his own courage to sing again. Behind every public performance is often an unseen army of supporters. And in Chuck Adams's case, that army was his family, led by the unwavering presence of his mother, Betty Adams. While viewers saw her briefly backstage on America's Got Talent, smiling proudly and introducing herself as the woman who had believed in her son since he was 8, what the cameras didn't show was the decades of persistence, encouragement, and quiet sacrifices she made to keep his dream alive. Betty had been his first audience in Connecticut backyards, his fiercest cheerleader after the Roc Nation fallout, and his emotional anchor during the lost decade of self-doubt. She wasn't alone either. His daughter helped him set up a YouTube channel, his son managed social media posts, and his wife became his emotional rock when the weight of failure threatened to crush him. America saw Chuck standing alone with a guitar, but the truth was he carried the hopes and resilience of an entire family onto that stage. Even Simon Cowell joked that he already knew Betty before Chuck had sung a word, a testament to how loudly she'd been cheering in the background. That moment symbolized more than maternal pride. It was the culmination of years of shared struggle, a family refusing to let one of their own fade into silence. Without them, the comeback might never have happened. But with them, Chuck had something more powerful than industry backing: unshakable love. When Chuck finally strummed his guitar on the AGT stage and began singing Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls, what unfolded was not just a performance but a revelation. His voice carried the weight of years spent in silence, yet it soared with a tenderness that stopped the entire theater in its tracks. He didn't mimic the original, he reimagined it, delivering every lyric with a vulnerability that made audiences feel as if they were hearing the song for the first time. Judges who had seen thousands of hopefuls leaned forward, captivated by the authenticity pouring from his voice. By the time he reached the chorus, tears filled eyes across the room, and when the final note faded into silence, it was quickly replaced by thunderous applause and a standing ovation. Even the notoriously tough Simon Cowell admitted Chuck had transformed the song into something brand new, while Howie Mandel declared he was better now than during his record deal days. His mother, standing just off stage with her hands over her heart, looked as though the years of heartbreak had been redeemed in one breathtaking moment. That performance was more than entertainment. It was vindication, proof that a man once discarded by the industry could return and command a stage with nothing more than his voice and his truth. What America didn't see that night was how calculated and deliberate Chuck's return to the stage truly was. His song choice, his delivery, even his vocal phrasing were not spur-of-the-moment decisions, but the result of nearly a year of preparation. He worked with vocal coaches, rewrote arrangements, and rehearsed relentlessly, determined that when his moment came, he would be undeniable. This wasn't luck, it was discipline disguised as ease. And while the broadcast made his rise look organic, the viral wave that followed was also fueled by behind-the-scenes hustle. His team pushed clips across Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook before the official AGT video had even reached 1 million views, ensuring his story reached far beyond television audiences. By the time producers realized what was happening, Chuck wasn't just another contestant, he was a phenomenon. America thought they were witnessing a raw breakout, but in truth, they were seeing the product of years of planning, persistence, and a carefully orchestrated comeback. That duality, authenticity on stage, strategy behind it, was what made Chuck Adams stand out. Because it proved he wasn't just talented, he was prepared to seize the moment he had been denied for so long. Among all the songs in Chuck's repertoire, none carried as much weight as I Believe in You, a track born not in triumph, but in despair. Written during one of the darkest chapters of his life, when depression and self-doubt threatened to extinguish his career completely, the song was never meant to be a hit or even shared widely. It was a personal anthem, a reminder to himself that his voice still mattered, that he still had value when the world seemed to have forgotten him. Yet when he performed it on America's Got Talent, that private lifeline became a public revelation. resonating with millions who heard their own struggles mirrored in its lyrics. Social media exploded, with TikTok and Instagram flooded by users creating videos set to its haunting chorus, while celebrities and fellow musicians praised its raw sincerity. Fans sent messages calling it therapy, a beacon of hope in their own battles. What the show didn't tell viewers was that Chuck had rewritten the song countless times, crafting every line until it was both personal enough to be authentic and universal enough to reach anyone listening. I Believe in You wasn't just a performance, it was proof that pain can be transformed into purpose. It became the song that not only reignited his career, but also established him as something greater than a contestant, a voice for resilience. After the viral explosion of his America's Got Talent audition, many assumed Chuck Adams would simply ride the wave of sudden fame. But what few realized is that he had already been quietly planning his next steps long before the world rediscovered him. Offers began pouring in from producers, television networks, and podcast hosts, each eager to attach themselves to his story of resilience and reinvention. Yet Chuck, seasoned by years of industry heartbreak, approached these opportunities with caution, determined not to repeat the mistakes of his past. Instead of rushing into another major label deal, he began laying the groundwork for a full studio album built on the same authenticity that had revived his career. A collection of songs pulled from his so-called lost years, tracks written during nights when he thought no one would ever hear him again. Insiders reveal that collaborations are in the works, including duets with both established artists who admire his honesty and rising singer-songwriters who see him as proof that it's never too late to break through. But Chuck's ambitions extend beyond music. Inspired by thousands of messages from fans who said his story had given them hope, he has begun exploring the creation of a non-profit foundation focused on mental health support for struggling artists, determined to provide the lifeline he once wished had been there for him. He has also dipped into motivational speaking, sharing his journey of failure, resilience, and second chances with schools and community groups, reminding audiences that success is not defined by straight lines, but by the courage to keep moving through setbacks. America's Got Talent introduced him to millions, but what lies ahead may cement his legacy far beyond a television stage, not just as a singer, but as a symbol of survival, empathy, and possibility. The story of Chuck Adams is more than a feel-good tale of a contestant winning applause. It is a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure, adapt, and rise again when everything seems lost. From the boy singing Elvis songs in Connecticut backyards to the songwriter navigating New York's cutthroat music scene, from the promise of a Roc Nation deal to the crushing collapse that silenced his career for over a decade, Chuck's life has been a roller coaster of triumph and tragedy. Yet what America saw in July 2025 was the result of every scar, every setback, every night he refused to quit even when quitting would have been easier. His mother's steadfast faith, his family's behind-the-scenes support, and his own stubborn refusal to abandon music all converged in that 12-second silence before his first note on the AGT stage. A silence that held within it years of heartbreak and the determination to turn pain into song. His performances reminded audiences that music is not just entertainment, it is connection, the bridge between one person's struggle and another's healing. And while producers framed his story as a comeback, the truth is Chuck Adams' journey is still unfolding, with new albums, advocacy work, and fresh dreams waiting to be realized. In the end, what makes his story remarkable is not just the applause or the viral fame, but the reminder it leaves for everyone watching, that it is never too late to begin again, that the most powerful voices are often the ones we almost forget, and that sometimes the greatest chapters of a life are written only after the hardest ones.